We begin with a reading from Isaiah chapter 6, 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lofty. The hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the thresholds, and I would have translated that the hinges on the doorposts, shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth, and it said with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who shall go for us? Vayomar Hineni Shalaheni. And I said, Here I am, send me. When Bishop Sutton called me to invite me to preach this morning, he indicated almost in his first sentence that it was on the commemoration of John and Charles Wesley. And I chuckled out loud at that moment because I was at that moment sitting in the parking lot of the McComas Funeral Home on the corner of Cokesbury Road and Abingdon Road in Abingdon, Maryland. Directly in front of me was the Asbury Cemetery surrounding Cokesbury Memorial United Methodist Church. And for those of you who still shop for books, you'll recognize those names from the Methodist denominational publishing houses. While the bishop and I were talking, I recalled a trip to London from about 30 years ago, where I found myself on the 24th of May, John Wesley's commemoration in the calendar of the Church of England, standing in the pulpit at St. Mary Le Strand, looking at the plaque that recalls John Wesley's service there as an associate. So permit me a little bit of an introduction. I came to the Diocese of Maryland in September of 1981 when Jan Hamill and I were married. We have been a clergy couple for almost 40 years now, and the secret is that we know better than to try to work together. A few of you will remember that I used to be somebody in the Diocese of Maryland. For almost 7 years, I served as canon for congregational development and as deployment officer. I have prayed in every church in the diocese, including over a dozen that have since closed. I have celebrated communion at about 95 different altars. And of the 60 congregations that chose new clergy leaders in Maryland during my time, 30 called women and 30 called men. I'm sitting here in my basement study while Jan is usually on the second floor in her study with the south-facing windows. We meet in the middle for dinner. For almost a year now, this has become the command center for Emmanuel Church. I do 9 webcasts a week from here, usually streaming to Facebook and YouTube Live simultaneously. Every evening at 8:45, I offer something we call Compline and Commentary and Saints and Stuff, which, if you are interested in something quiet and meditative before bed, you should probably not tune into. Let me state the obvious. This is not the kind of priesthood I envisioned 40 or even 5 years ago. I think both Wesleys would understand and sympathize. The lesson from the Hebrew Scriptures serves, among other things, to remind us that John and Charles were and remained Anglican priests. Many of us who are priests chose this passage from Isaiah about the vision and call of the prophet for our ordination service. We did so hoping that the brave words of the prophet would inspire us to faithfulness in our calling. Here I am, send me. I know that I did. And I know that people called to different orders of ministry hear and respond to similar, often more challenging calls to ministry. So, if this passage was as important to you as it was to me, you may need to brace yourself. I no longer think it means what I thought it did. Before I explain, let me assure you that I'm not just making this up. In the early 1980s, I started taking the odd class or two at the Ecumenical Institute of St. Mary's Seminary in Baltimore. Shout out to Jason Pauling. I fell in with a tough gang that wanted to dive deeply into biblical languages. And over the course of a couple of years, we did an advanced year of Hebrew, 4 semesters of Syriac and Aramaic, and 2 semesters of Coptic. By that point, Jan and I had 2 small children, so I took a master's degree and bailed, while the rest of the lot went on to do Gez and Armenian. Though I do not read anywhere near as fluently as I once could, I still do exegesis in Hebrew and Greek each week as I prepare to preach. And what I have concluded over the years of doing this is that the Hebrew word Hineni does not translate well. The word appears 178 times in the Hebrew scriptures, and the great majority of the times it comes at the beginning of a sentence and is more or less rendered correctly as behold. Spoken loudly, it is a way of getting your attention. You and I might say, listen up, or yo, or the Lord be with you. But more than a handful of times, the word appears mid-sentence to a much different effect. And when it does, the story usually turns out to be important. In Genesis 22, God speaks to Abraham unexpectedly, his son Isaac nearby, and Abraham says, Hineni. When Moses hears the voice of God out of the burning bush, he says, Hineni. When young Samuel hears the voice of God in the tabernacle, he says, Hineni. Jacob uses the word in this way several times, as does Jeremiah and a couple of the Psalms. And of course, Isaiah, after this amazing vision in the temple. In each of these cases, the word is translated, here I am. And the implication is to assert that when these great heroes hear the divine voice, they are instantly ready, willing, and able to respond to whatever is required of them. My Old Testament professors and seminary said scholars had a special name for this usage, the ethical dative, as if that were supposed to mean something. Now, there have been times when I was ready, willing, and able to put up my hand and hope to be sent. But the truth is, on most days, I don't know if I could be so positive. So these examples, well, they bothered me. Then one day I had kind of a revelation. I could substitute another word for Hineni in all of these passages, and it would still work. We have such a word in English. Huh? I'm pretty sure that would be the first word out of my mouth if I heard what I knew was the voice of God coming out of a burning bush or an incense-filled sanctuary. I think the word is used onomatopoetically. It doesn't mean something, it just sounds like something. Just like the word huh in English can be inflected to indicate a variety of shadings, so can Hineni. When God speaks to Abraham in Genesis 22, I hear a huh that means, please stop bothering me. When Moses hears the voice in the burning bush, I hear a huh that means, wait, what? When Samuel hears a voice 3 times in the tabernacle, I hear a huh that is full of confusion. And Isaiah says huh in the temple when he recognizes that he is the only one there to carry out the mission. It is a sigh of recognition. Now, none of these stories sound to me like a Dudley Do-Right volunteering to save the day. I may be wrong about this. There was certainly enough scholarly weight around the notion of an ethical dative to make it the normative understanding 40 years ago. But I also know that if I am to be measured by that standard, there is very little hope of me being much use in God's kingdom. If, however, I am allowed to be a little bothered when God calls, or shocked, or confused, or feel a sense of resignation, then there is hope for me and the ministries I am called to. And it means also that I do not have to raise up my own army of perfect soldiers for Christ from the pews of Emmanuel Church. Just regular folks who present themselves for ministry with all the regular baggage and emotions. Hineni is an acceptable component in Christian formation. Back to the Wesleys before I get the hook. I'd love to add a word here about Charles Wesley, and I have some observations about his musical enterprise during the 18th century and the movement in English hymnody from largely pentatonic to diatonic scales. Whoever sings prays twice, and if your scale has 7 notes rather than just 5, there you go. But let me close by reminding you of a key moment in John Wesley's story. Struggling with what sounds a lot like depression, he wrote of his now famous visit to a Moravian prayer meeting, beginning with these words: "In the evening, I went very unwillingly to a society in Aldersgate Street, where one was reading Luther's preface to the Epistle to the Romans. Like the great characters of our biblical tradition, John Wesley's first response to a call to a new ministry was Hanani, huh? And, like those same forebears, once he went to where he was called, God's grace flowed mightily, all the way, in fact, to Harford County." Amen.